What do we know about a man used for ritual in Hollywood? USA. On today's episode of Fake Tank, I am going to tell you all you need to know about a man named Tony Alamo who was used as an altar boy in satanic rituals in Hollywood. Ritual abuse is a very sensitive subject matter, but it's one that must be discussed because it's more prevalent than most people realize. His mother was a secretary at a local school while his father worked as a construction worker. At first, it seemed like a great idea. Tony learned how to throw punches and kick, which helped him stand up for himself against the bullies. There was alcohol everywhere and loud music blaring from the speakers. But what really caught his attention were the women. And when he tried to fight back, they beat him up and threatened to hurt him if he told anyone what happened. He threw himself into his studies and started hanging out with a different crowd. He went to a local church and told the priest everything that had happened to him. The priest listened patiently and then told Tony that he needed to forgive the men who attacked him. There, she performed a ceremony and told him he was now part of her cult. He started to feel guilty about participating in the rituals and eventually broke away from the cult. However, they weren't happy about him leaving and threatened to harm him if he ever told anyone what he had seen. Tony took their threats seriously and spent the next few years trying to forget what had happened. He married and had children and tried to build a normal life for himself. They would also force them to watch as animals were sacrificed. They had no idea what had happened to them or why they were feeling the way they did. Many of them would go on to develop severe mental health issues as a result of the abuse. This was done to put the boys in a trance-like state so that they were more susceptible to suggestion. It's also a reminder that those in positions of power and influence are not beyond reproach. Just because someone is rich and famous doesn't mean they should be allowed to do whatever they want. The producer would then use this opportunity to implant suggestions into their minds. Do you think Tony Alamo's story is proof that satanic ritual abuse is real? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and stay tuned for more videos like this one. Thanks again for watching. However, the same can't be said for the producer. He was arrested and charged with several counts of sexual abuse. He was also forced to pay millions of dollars to the victims in a settlement. He would tell them things like, "You are mine now," or "You will do whatever I ask you to do." These suggestions would later manifest themselves as compulsions and obsessions. But the cult continued to haunt him, and he eventually had to go into witness protection to escape their wrath. She said the cult would protect him and help him get revenge on the men who had attacked him. Most people, including the police, didn't believe him. They thought he was making the whole thing up for attention. However, there were others who believed him, including several former cult members. They came forward with their own stories of abuse at the hands of the Hollywood elite. Yes, the infamous shock rocker was once a member of a satanic cult that used young boys for rituals. According to Tony, the producer was particularly interested in him because of his athletic build. He believed that this made him the perfect vessel for the ritual. The producer reportedly told Tony that he was going to use him to channel Satan into his body during the rituals. This is why Tony was given the name Son of Satan. When Tony finally came forward with his story, he identified Marilyn Manson as the woman who had recruited him into the cult. He would give them drugs like LSD and then use hypnosis to make them more suggestible. Once they were under his control, he would tell them horrible things about themselves, things that weren't true, but that the boys began to believe. This made them even more vulnerable and allowed the producer to dominate their minds. He also said that the cult leader was a powerful Hollywood producer who used his influence to get the best young talent for their rituals. According to Tony, the producer had a list of criteria that each potential victim had to meet. He was looking for young, attractive boys who were between the ages of 12 and 18. They also had to be emotionally and psychologically vulnerable. The producer believed that these boys were the most susceptible to suggestion and therefore the easiest to manipulate. Tony agreed and soon found himself drawn into the world of the cult. He participated in their rituals and even started to enjoy it. The cult members treated him like a son, and he finally felt like he belonged somewhere. They gave him a new name, Son of Satan, and told him he was destined for great things. He said that was the only way he could move on and put the incident behind him. Tony did his best to follow the priest's advice, but he couldn't bring himself to forgive the men. He hated them and wanted revenge. He also began working out at the gym to make himself stronger and more confident. But the trauma from that night continued to haunt him, and he started having nightmares and flashbacks. He also became severely depressed and began cutting himself. That night, Tony vowed to keep what happened at the party a secret. He didn't want his parents to find out. He was ashamed and scared, and he knew they would be furious if they knew what had happened to him. They were dressed in tight dresses and makeup, and there were far too many of them for the number of guys who were there. Some of the guys at the party started paying Tony a lot of attention, and he quickly realized they were interested in him in more ways than one. Before long, they started to pressure him to drink and do things he didn't want to do. She introduced herself as a friend of the priest and said she was there to help Tony. She told him the priest had spoken highly of him and said she believed he was a good kid who just needed some guidance. She offered to help him with his problems if he would meet with her alone. And without telling anyone, Tony agreed. But because he was only 13 years old and outnumbered, he couldn't say no. But then he was approached by some older kids who invited him to go to a party. They told him there would be lots of girls there and it would be a good time. So against his better judgment, he went. It was the worst decision of his life. They were a regular couple who had no reason to think their son would ever be involved in anything satanic. In fact, they were deeply religious and made sure Tony attended church every Sunday. However, Tony started getting picked on by other kids when he was only in second grade. The boys would make fun of him for being skinny and for the way he dressed. He was always wearing hand-me-down clothes, which didn't help matters. And before long, he became the target of bullies at school. In fact, when you consider how many famous celebrities come out with stories about being abused or taken advantage of as children or teenagers, it makes you wonder if this isn't just a part of the cost of doing business in the entertainment industry. But what exactly happened to Tony Alamo? And why was he chosen as a child for these satanic rituals? Let's find out. Tony Alamo was born on November 27, 1963. He grew up in a middle-class family in Los Angeles, California. When Tony confided in his parents about what was happening, they decided he should take martial arts classes to help build his confidence and give him a way to defend himself. When he arrived at the party, he realized it wasn't like any party he'd been to before. That night changed Tony's life forever. Not only did he get introduced to drugs and alcohol, but he was also sexually assaulted by several men. Over the next few years, Tony tried to put the incident behind him. One day, Tony decided he could take it no longer. And that's when the Satanic cult came calling. One day, Tony was approached by a strange woman. The woman took Tony to a secluded cabin in the woods. But as time went on, Tony began to doubt what he was doing. Now, here's where things get interesting. The woman who had recruited Tony into the cult was none other than Marilyn Manson. Once the boys were selected, they were invited to a party at the producer's mansion. It was there that they were drugged and taken advantage of. The producer allegedly used a combination of drugs, hypnosis, and psychological manipulation to control the boys. According to Tony, the rituals themselves were terrifying. The producer and his friends would force the boys to participate in sexual acts and other degrading activities. After the rituals were over, the boys were left traumatized and confused. As you can imagine, when Tony came forward with his story, he was met with disbelief. In the end, the allegations against Marilyn Manson were dropped and she was never charged with a crime. This case is a reminder that satanic ritual abuse is a real and serious issue. Thank you for watching.